I'm Dr. Yosefa Fogel-Rubel. This is a podcast episode brought to you by Matan Women's Institute for Torah Study. Welcome back to our Dvarim series titled Torah from Our Teachers. Moshe is our greatest human teacher, and the book of Dvarim includes his monumental addresses to the nation. Each week, our guests are sharing Torah learned from their most influential teachers, although the truth is that this week's episode is quite different. You'll hear about that in a moment. This week's episode has been sponsored anonymously in honor and in thanks to the Torah that we share weekly on this podcast. And I quote from our sponsor that she also wants to give a great thank you to all of those who helped make this podcast possible. I want to thank Matan, Adina Sternberg, and those who helped me along the way, where we think about ideas and we share inspiration for coming episodes. I think this is a good opportunity also to thank all the other anonymous sponsors who make this entire project possible. And I also want to give a great shout out to Dana, our editor, who does a phenomenal job making this sound professional and smooth. Thank you so much to today's sponsor, and thank you to all of those who make this podcast possible. For those of you who love listening weekly, sponsoring an episode is a wonderful way to show your gratitude for the high-level content we try and put out each week. For more information, contact me at podcast@matan.org.il or the Matan office. Parshat Ha'azinu is comprised of a poem describing the consequences of Israel's anticipated betrayal of God, a real negative prediction on the part of Moshe. The poem emphasizes God's faithfulness and Israel's betrayal. God brought the people from the desert into the promised land, and the people continually squandered the opportunity and forget God. In a measure-for-measure punishment, God withdraws from Israel, and they suffer from war and natural disasters. God only saves Israel from total destruction in order to prevent the enemy from claiming credit for itself. Many of the ideas that I've just described in this very short summary are actually the topic of today's conversation with Adina. Rabbanit Adina Sternberg, longtime lecturer at Matan and graduate of their Hilchata program, and the co-host of their weekly Hebrew podcast, along with Adina Sternberg, has a new book out on the holidays, and you'll be hearing all about that book in this episode. It's a book that she put out after 1 year in the really wonderful, unique program called Kitvuni, which is a program that is under Matan and run by Dr. Yael Ziegler, which creates a platform for women to publish. They have a year includes a salary and many other different kinds of mentorship that enables them to focus almost singularly on writing their book. Adina was in the first cohort 3 years ago, and it was there that she wrote the bulk of this book that is hitting the shelves in the coming weeks. And so we're going to hear specifically how several of the elements in that book actually connect quite directly to Parshat Ha'azinu and to the way that it was described before. Here is our conversation. Adina, it's great to have you back on the podcast.
Thank you. It's great to be back.
We haven't spoken in a while, but I think actually traditionally we have spoken for the Book of Dvarim in the past. So it's good to be back here with you. And it's a particularly special occasion and a special podcast episode because in addition to speaking about Parashat Ha'azinu, we also wanted to speak about your new book, which I'm thrilled that you're sharing Torah with the world. So maybe tell us a little bit about what is in this book that's upcoming, and obviously where everybody could find it and buy their first copy. What's the book called? What's it about?
Okay, well, in Hebrew it's called Ohel Moed Liyamei Moed. It's supposed to be a play on words between Moed as a place, Ohel Moed as a place, and Moed as a time. Mm-hmm. So in a sense, it talks about the connection between time and place in our holy days. So the fact that, or I'd say the focus of the book is on how some of our holidays are focused around the home. Shabbat is Al Yitzei Ish Mimkomo B'Yom HaShabbat. You stay home. You bring the Shechina into your house. Okay, you cut yourself off from the outside world. I think one of the things that mostly expresses that is Isur Hotza'ah Mireshut LeReshut. You can't take things out. You can't bring things in. Places that don't have an eruv, they feel it very strongly. Yeah. Especially now we have an English-speaking audience.
Who knows what that existence looks like? Because when I speak with my Israeli students, they literally have no idea what I'm talking about.
So I was zoche to live 2 years in a place without an eruv.
You were zoche, yeah.
Yeah, I was zoche. So I know the feeling. I know it makes a really big difference. And when you take the other side of the spectrum, you have the 3 regalim, where the whole point is to go to the place of God, to go and meet God on in his turf, on his place, in Ohel Moed, where the time and the meeting come together. And the meeting place is in the center. I always like thinking of the word Moed as a date, right? Because it's both the time and the meeting.
Beautiful, yeah.
And so it works better in English, but it was very problematic to try to translate the name of the book.
So what's it in English?
So I asked a whole bunch of people. Some suggested holy times and holy places, or holy time and holy place. I ended up, I don't know if it's a good idea. Maybe when we actually translate the book into English, it might end up being something different, but I called it In the Presence and in the Present.
Oh, I like that, Adina.
Thank you.
I think that was well done.
Thank you. So it was both the idea of the presence of God, but also present time, and also to be present. And I mean, a lot of things together. And that's also part of the book, trying to figure out how in Tanakh and Mishnah and Gemara, a lot of the ideas of the holidays surround around the Mikdash. I mean, if you think about it, most of the psukim talk about V'ikravtem Mishel Hashem, and you have the Musafim, and you have Aliyah LaRegel, and you have lots of things about the holidays that focus around the Mikdash. And you think about it, lots of times people, they don't want to learn Kodshim in Mishnah because it's really hard in the world of the Mikdash, and then they go to Seder Moed, and they find out that half of the Mishnayot talk about Korbanot.
Yeah.
Right? You take Masechet Yoma. Most of it is Avodat Kohen Gadol in the Mikdash. It's what the high priest does. So how do you take that and understand the context of the Chagim when you don't blot out everything that has to do with Korbanot and Mikdash, but you look at it and you focus on it and you try to see the ideas that come forth from looking at the context. And also there are some Chagim that are more like Shabbistic Chagim, like all of the Chagim of Tishrei or Shabbaton. They have a certain, like Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, you don't have to go to the Mikdash, even though there's a great focus in the Mikdash. But Rosh Hashanah, you can, and Yom Kippur, as Shabbaton, you're in home. And Sukkot is sort of like somewhere in the middle, because on one hand, it's a regel, you need to go to the Mikdash. On the other hand, you commemorate it by building a house and sitting in that house. But that house has certain characteristics that remind us of the Mishkan. So it's sort of like somewhere in the middle. So the question is how you take all these ideas and also bring them into present day.
First of all, the book sounds like a companion for Chagim, right? Meaning it's a great book.
Definitely.
You're going to read on the Chagim. Obviously, you can read it always, but it sounds like a perfect book for the Chagim.
I also give a certain kind of like a few general chapters, like about the difference between Shabbat and Yom Tov, and about what Chol HaMoed is supposed to be and what Aliyah LaRegel is supposed to be, and certain like structures of thought. So one of the chapters is, and we'll talk about this later, is the concept of im kebanim, im keavadim, or we more sons of God, or more servants or slaves of God. And that gives a general way to look at our relationship with God that afterwards will be come forth in the Chagim.
So I think what also sounds wonderful is that in earlier episodes this year, one with Shuli in the beginning of Vayikra, we spoke a little bit about Chazal's success in taking a world without a mikdash and making a framework, a religious framework for our lives, even without all the accoutrements of mikdash. And what I think sounds wonderful about your book is that essentially you're saying, well, we're in a world without a mikdash, but we've also lost a lot of the depth of the chag. And these explorations in your book, I think, are going to be able to help people regain some of that depth without obviously right now having that ability to go there and experience the chag as an Aliyah LaRegel. But it sounds a little bit like you're almost like tracing back some of these footsteps, at least in our hearts and minds, so that we can then experience that more deeply.
Right.
Does that resonate, that description?
Yeah. Well, I'm remembering I wrote this book in a program called Kitvuni here in Matan. And it's this marvelous program where Dr. Yael Tigler said, you know what, we're here to bring forward the Torah of women. And one of the things that we're still lacking, we have already women learning and we have women teaching, but we don't have enough women writing.
Yeah.
And Matan and Yael, and together with Rabbanit Dr. and Chaya Katz, got the funding to bring here a group of women. We're now starting the third year. I was in the first cohort. And to give us a certain stipend to sit and write the book, and then afterwards, together with a cooperation with Magid Koren publication, to put out the book. Which is, first of all, I mean, for me, it was a prize because I would never have sat down and given all that time without A, having a financial back, and B, without knowing that actually there's somebody already said they're going to put the book out.
Yeah.
But when we met the first time, the first cohort, and we were telling each other about our books and what we're writing, and someone said, wow, that sounds so Karaite. Did you think of maybe looking for the Karaite sources? I said, well, first of all, I do look also at what the Karaites write about these things. It interests me. Also, my father is a big Karaite expert. But it's sort of like some people, their holidays, they start from Chassidut, or they start from Achshava, or they start from Sefer HaChinuch. And I'm sort of going back and saying, wait, but we've missed this whole level of understanding that we've kind of put out of our mind because people don't like reading about korbanot. Yeah. You get to Sefer Vayikra, you put your mind on automatic, and right, it's like automatic pilot. Okay, wake us up when we get to the interesting parts. So I don't really deal with the korbanot themselves, but I do deal with the question of what does it mean coming to the Mikdash? What does it mean meeting God? Lir'ot et pnei Hashem, what does that mean? God sees us, we see him. What does that mean?
At the risk of repeating myself on the podcast forum, I shared a few weeks ago, just as an introduction to an episode that we used from the archives, is that I went to Har Bayit for the first time. I
also did this year.
Really? Mm-hmm. So we went for my daughter's bat mitzvah, and we took her and my second child and our baby. We left a few kids in the middle at home, but it's mind-blowing. I was surprised how much we all were moved.
I actually was surprised how I wasn't moved enough.
Okay, so interesting.
Yeah.
Right? Meaning I felt like it was like jumping into a map that I hang out in all the time. I think like you even more so in the topics you love to learn and teach. But I just feel like it, like when you press the re-navigate button on Waze, because like you were looking at something else and then you don't see yourself on the way you're driving, and then you press that little arrow and it re-navigates you and it finds your spot. I felt like it was a moment of like a re-navigating. Like we've been a little bit left. We've been south, west for a while at the Kotel, and it kind of pressed a re-navigate button. I'm not saying, I don't mean anything politically. I know it has political ramifications. I don't mean it that way, but I felt like it was a particularly positive experience the day we went. I'd be interested to hear about that after. But I just wanted to say one other thing about you, and you can close your ears because I'm going to say shevach in front of you. But for all of our listeners, I want you to realize that the Rabbanit Adina sits at a very unique nexus. Okay, most of us don't have such virtuoso of being also unbelievably gifted teacher in Tanakh and also in Mishnah and Gemara. And you have your hand in all of those, which is, again, don't listen, but on my list of 5 women who are like the biggest Talmidot Chachamim, you're on that list. Okay. Wow. So I just want to say that what I was so excited when you told me a few years ago that you read in this book is that I was so happy that because you always say, well, I know I teach Mishnah and Gemara, but you have a deep love for Tanakh, and you always feel like it gets kind of like shortchanged because you wrote your doctorate, Dafka, in Torah Sheba'al Peh. And so I was so happy that in this book, you get to sort of use all of those kelim that you love.
I do. So much. I called it Iyunei Mikra, Iyunei Mishnah, Iyunei Drasha, because I really wanted to get to all the places. Yes, it does. It mixes together in the end. In the end, things that you learn in Tanakh, they highlight things differently in Mishnah. And after you learn the Mishnah, you look differently at the Tanakh.
That's the right way to go about it. Not all of us have those same access points. So, Adina, well, your book really sits at a nexus also with all the Chagim and Shabbat. I want us to maybe pull something out of it that also anchors us in this week's Parashah, right? In this week's Parashah, famously, we have Shirat HaHazinu, which there's really so much to say about it. I think also first we have to say that Hazinu is difficult for us, right? As learners, maybe not for you, but for the average.
You mean in terms of the language?
In terms of the language, and also it's very harsh. Meaning, if you even understand what it's saying, then it's very harsh. And we just had the tochacha, meaning we just had this presentation a few weeks back, but we just had this presentation of what will happen if we don't listen. And then we have a poetic description of the wayward nature of Am Yisrael, right? That Hashem does everything for us, but we are kfuyei tova. We don't do that. And again, a much more poetic presentation, which a lot of it can go over our heads, even for your average Israeli Hebrew speaking. It's not that much more understandable for them. And so I guess maybe let's go a little bit deeper in this. And I know specifically we were thinking together about the dominant metaphor in Ha'azinu, which describes us, right? Because there are all different ways that our relationship with God can be described. But the dominant metaphor in Ha'azinu is the metaphor of father and child. And this, I would say, sometimes even I feel like it can be sometimes a patronizing metaphor, at least in the way, again, you'll respond to all of this because I might be saying things that are total kfira in your eyes, but meaning there could be something patronizing about that. We keep being told that we're just this like silly child who doesn't get the point. Okay. So again, it's said in much more poetic terms in Ha'azinu, but somehow this is the banner that we're supposed to sort of, raise over the centuries, God, just let you know that God said that we are not going to follow, but eventually he'll still help us anyways. And it presents this difficult, like contractual description of our relationship with God. So just by way of introduction, but I'd love for you to jump deeper into the metaphor, anything else in the Shira that really relates to the things you've been thinking about.
Okay, so I want to just go back a second to the book. Part of what I do in the book is try to figure out the nature of our relationship with God. Meaning, if we're supposed to come 3 times a year to visit God, what do we do at that visit? It's different if you come as a servant to serve God, to bring sacrifices, or if you come as a child to say hello, to reconnect, to build a relationship. Chazal taught us that in the Regalim, we also have Yemei Din, which is very interesting. Are these times of happiness or times of Din? But I think that it has to do with the fact that it's times that we come to visit. If you go to your parents to visit, you want to be on your best behavior. You want your children to have clean.
Ideally.
You make sure that your children wear clothes that actually match, that you picked out for them and not they picked out for themselves. And you try to be a little bit nicer. And not always it's because you want something from them.
Totally.
But lots of times you might actually get something from them. So God says, you know what? I want you to come and visit. Bring with you some kind of present. But it's because I want to give back to you. I want to give you this shefa, this
I want to give you my Shabbat leftovers so you can put them in your freezer.
Exactly.
It's been my dream, by the way, my whole life. I want someone to put leftovers in my freezer.
Okay, my kids don't eat leftovers. No, but the point is that this meeting is at a time where God can look at us and see what we need and give to us. And we just need to be, on our best behavior and try to justify it. But it's a different kind of thing if I'm saying, okay, I'm just coming here to serve God or be his slave, and whatever he gives me, he'll give me. Or if it's a parent-child relationship. So that has to do with the chagim. But really, when we go into the
and
metaphor,
all of that you explore through the texts themselves. Yeah,
yes,
I'm just okay.
Yes, absolutely. But as really, when we talk about the underlying metaphor. We go to Rosh Hashanah and we start saying, im kevanim, im keavadim. Now, avadim is kind of tricky. Is it slaves or is it servants or is it not even any of them, but just subjects?
Right.
Right? So it's not quite clear, but Eved and Adon, right? So you're sort of like, okay, I don't know which metaphor I'm in now. Am I in a child-parent metaphor? Am I in a slave or servant-master metaphor? And what does that actually mean, right? When I ask you, what is the difference between a child? You said some kind of paternalistic type thing. But for you, what does it mean, the difference between a child-parent metaphor and a slave and master metaphor?
Well, I think one is the benevolence you assume on the part of the parent, which I think, meaning that's not about me, that's about the parent. If it's my master, then they don't owe me anything. Do you know what I'm saying? Or they don't, in their heart, believe that they have to give me anything. Whereas a parent, there's this natural instinct that I'm here to give, even if they don't give in return. Meaning there's something more altruistic I think supposed to be on the part of a parent. Like a master, it's a much more contractual relationship.
Okay.
I think you also assume a certain degree of love when it's a parent, or a degree of fidelity that I don't know. It's a different kind of fidelity when it comes to a servant. I feel like that wasn't where you were going with it.
No, I'm glad, because I think that's what most people think, right?
Okay.
That parent, it has to do with a relationship based on love.
Yeah.
Whereas a servant master is based on fear and etc. Right? Ahava mul yir'ah. Malachi also talks about it. Im av anochi ayeh kvodi, im adonim ani ayeh mora'i. Okay, so, but we know that in the Torah it says that parents, you need to both respect or lechabed and fear. But for me, it works in a totally different place of how I view avodat Hashem, where it resonates with me. So the first thing I want to say is that if you look through the Torah, we do have this concept of avadim, also in our parsha itself, because at the end of the parsha it says, Harninu goyim amo ki dam avadav yikom. But again, here I'm not sure it's a slave, it might be more his subjects.
Yeah.
Okay? But as you said, in Hazinu itself, we have more about the father and the son. But even if you look at the Torah itself, you can say that when Hashem took the people of Israel out of Egypt, and they were slaves to Pharaoh, so they become a certain kind of, meaning the slaves to God, right? And we have the idea, Kili b'nei Yisrael avadim, which it says in the context of Yovel, where...
But they're also b'nei b'chori Yisrael. They're
exactly.
b'chor of Hashem, and it's very clear that he likes us much more than Paro did.
Exactly.
He cares a lot more about us than he did.
Right. You can also talk about Bnei B'chori Yisrael as God saying, you know what, because he's family, I'll redeem him. And then, like the concepts of Geula and Yovel, it's not always clear if Geula means to release or to redeem and then bring into one's person home to continue the slavery. Meaning, if someone's Goel, a family member who became a slave, doesn't mean that he's not a slave anymore. There's a machloket in Chazal. Is he released or does he become a slave of the person who redeemed him? So, does God redeem us or does he release us? It's not quite clear. Okay. But even then, the only real time that they talk about the concept of slavery or Kili b'nei Yisrael avadim is to say, but you can't become slaves to your brothers. Okay. It really is, on one hand, you're avadim, but that means that you can't be avadim. But the dominant metaphor is a metaphor of children. Right? B'nei B'chori Yisrael, it starts already there. And we see it through the story of asking for meat in the desert where Moshe Rabbeinu wants to quit. And he says, they're not my children. I didn't give birth to them. And he's implying that who did? God.
Hashem.
Right? And we can really see the whole story of Yetziat Mitzrayim as a story of labor.
Adina, the underlying unspoken metaphor of the entire book of Bereshit is the metaphor of family, meaning that, that's first true. Of all, Adam and Chava in Gan Eden, there is we're not going to do an analysis of that story, but there's every element of, I would even say, infant and parent, meaning that's an early stage of humanity. And the whole learning, how to function in a family structure is preparing us for some sort of familial, right, which we mess up in a lot in the book of Bereshit. So it's preparing us for this complicated, dynamic family structure that we're going to be part of as an Am, meaning it's the implied metaphor of all of Sefer Bereshit.
And later on, it's not only implied. It says it specifically in the Midbar.
Yeah.
And Moshe Rabbeinu in Dvarim also enhances it. And it comes to, and we see it in Hazinu.
Yeah. Just one pasuk, just to remind everyone listening. Who's,
Hello, avicha kanecha wascha ve'yochonenecha, right? You mentioned that we're not good kids and that we're shichet lo banav mumam, right? That we're not listening to God and we're not good kids. But the concept is that God took care of us. V'yenikeu dvash misela, right? We have this nursing metaphor, and which also if you look at the man as a certain kind of nursing, right? Where God, he's the one who decides when we get it and how much we get.
Well, just the idea that it tastes the same always. That is a metaphor of
that is
breast
kfira,
milk.
just so you know. Lots of people will tell you that's kfira.
Okay, I'm just
because of the Midrash says they tasted whatever they wanted, but the pshat is they got the same thing.
And that's the metaphor of breast milk also, meaning that is the same concept, meaning this is something uniform that they're given for a long time.
Right.
Continues that.
But what I like about the metaphor of parenting versus a metaphor of servitude, besides the fact that it's much more, it's more comfortable, right? It talks about a relationship. But what I like about it is that it's dynamic. Meaning, if you're a slave, that's who you are. Yeah. You wake up in the morning and you serve God. And in the afternoon, you serve God. And you go to sleep serving God. And your definition of what you do is to be a servant. And that's the same thing today and tomorrow and another 20 years. But the Torah, when it talks about the metaphor of a child, talks also about a metaphor of growing up. So what you said about having different stages, Adam and Chava, they need to grow up, right? Also, Bnei Israel need to grow up. And I see this especially through the story of the meat, actually. Because when Bnei Israel ask for meat, they could eat meat if they wanted. They had man, but if they wanted, they could bring a korban and eat meat. But when they asked for meat, it was a sort of kind of this quest for independence. We want our own meat. We want to decide what to eat. We don't want to be dependent on God and God's refrigerator to have food, right? We don't want to have to, even if we eat meat, to bring it to the mikdash and to have to eat from God's table. We want our own. We want to grow up. And I see this because when the people of Israel enter the land of Israel, they're allowed to eat meat on their own. I mean, there's a difference. There's a shift in our dependence.
Yeah, well, there's even that clear moment in the beginning of Sefer Yoshua where it says exactly that the man stops, meaning there's a very clear moment where independence is reached, meaning maybe it didn't hit everybody exactly in the right moment of their life, but from the perspective of God, that stage has ended. You are now on your own.
And I like that because it puts into the metaphor of Avodat Hashem the idea of independence, meaning there's certain times in the life of the nation, and we can also see it in the lives of individuals, where you're very much connected to God, where you sit around God, and you're under His metaphoric apron, right? You can even imagine the Mishkan with all its the cloth.
Love that, Adina. Love that. I love that. Yeah,
okay.
I'm with you on the image. Yeah.
Okay, and this idea of a sort of betzel knafecha tastireni, and we want to be really close, and we also have certain kind of mixed feelings about it because we want to be close, but we also want to be independent, and we don't always know when to do it. But when we go through the desert, I always think about the metaphor of, you know how kids, when they're doing something wrong, they go into their rooms because then they think that nobody sees them, right? And then uchvod Hashem nira be'anan. That's when the parent, sticks his head into the room and says, "What are you doing? Why is it so quiet in here?"
Yeah.
Right? So every once in a while in the desert, Uchvod Hashem nira be'anan. Right? You think that you're stam saying Lashon Hara. You think that you're just, complaining in your tents. But God is here. He's listening. He's very, very present. But that's not the way it's supposed to be all the time. We're supposed to enter the land of Israel. We're supposed to go and sit, each tachat kafno v'tachat tenato, sit in your, leave home. But you're supposed to come visit 3 times a year. You're supposed to come and have a celebration and enjoy renewing the relationship and have this good feeling together and go bring presents and go home with God's blessing. But it's an Avodat Hashem that also appreciates independence and people growing up and having a certain kind of self-definition. Right? If you're a servant, that's all you are. If you're a child, your parents gives you chinuch. And he teaches you the guidelines and tells you and sets borders. But afterwards, you're a person of your own. And Shevet Levi will be different from Shevet Yisachar, and Shevet Dan will be different from Binyamin. And each child has his own characteristic and personality. And each person within the Shevet can decide what he wants to be and who he wants to be. And it's a different kind of Avodat Hashem, because it's sort of like a framework within which you work, but it's not the only definition of who you are. Like it's a certain, God sits back and says, go out and, bring who you are to the world and plant and harvest and go to high tech and go. Like there's so many things that you can be within being sons of God.
So can I bring us back for a moment to the parasha? Because the end of the Shira of Ha'azinu, we have here this understanding that no matter what happens and how bad we are, Hashem will be there to seek out justice, right? And to destroy the enemies. And it's a little bit like saying you can gain your independence, but no matter what, your parents will be there to help you.
And you'll also always represent them.
Right, meaning, and it's like this push-pull, because on one hand, sometimes your children need to fall and you need to not save them, meaning saving them is not a good route because it makes them ultimately feel like they're not responsible for themselves. On the other hand, it's clearly said here as a comfort for Am Yisrael, like meaning that no matter what happens, and there'll be many times where there's enemies who are destroying and, wreaking wreaking havoc on their lives, that ultimately Hashem will never abandon us completely. I think about it 1 second.
That, you see like all these Hollywood movies where a kid...
I try not to, but yeah, I'm with you.
Where a kid grows up with a silver spoon and they become so spoiled.
Yeah.
And the parent at a certain point needs to say, go out and do it on your own. Right? So shamanta avita kasita.
Yeah.
You've gotten so much from your parent. If you don't realize where you got it from and don't take it for granted and understand that this is a blessing that God gives you and you need to deserve it, you need to hold on to that thought. And otherwise, God will say, okay, you know what? You don't need me. And we can see that throughout the Tanakh. Every time the people of Israel said, well, where is God? Who is he? God said, you don't need me? Go ahead. Enjoy. See how the world works for you without me.
I think that in many places in the Torah, and especially in Dvarim, we could see that there's a need for us to always be suffering a little bit. Okay, we could spend a long time looking at different mokarot. I think that that's an accurate description of many sources. Also, not having too much wealth, meaning always this fear that when things are too good, people will forget who's at the source of everything. And so there's sort of like this function that challenge plays in order so that we remember that we need to be dependent on a Kadosh Baruch Hu. And I think we all see this in our lives, right? Meaning many times the people who have the most depth to them and a lot of wisdom, they're people who've learned that through difficulties. Now, would you ask for the difficulty? No. But unfortunately, those experiences are often what teach us our greatest lessons.
And you see that parents who overprotect their kids and don't let them learn to be disappointed and don't give them challenges are actually not doing a good service to their kids.
Yeah. And I think that therefore I want to say that with this metaphor, which I agree with, identify with everything you described about that metaphor, there's something sticky about it, meaning there's something sticky about the way the song ends. Again, it's the poem itself of this idea that, but in the end, Hashem will always be there to help us. And I want to just take it for a second back to the metaphor, because I think that for me, what feels more successful than saying, okay, God will always help us in the end, is that one of the biggest praises that I can ever give about my nuclear family is they always know how to show up. Meaning it's the biggest praise I can think of everything about my wonderful family, is whether it's to show up at a family simcha, even though it's super far away, or meaning they ultimately there's this feeling that like they'll know where to put themselves. Mm-hmm. And that's a little bit how I think of, again, I'm a little bit warping what it actually says in the poem, okay? Because I think it does say something more about like a salvation. But sometimes salvation can, as you said, can be undermining for the actual potential of here Am Yisrael, but it's saying that God will know when to show up, right? I mean, you can know He's not going to take care of everything, and He's not going to make things easy, as we know, but meaning He'll know when to be there.
You can take it back and say He might also get very angry, because part of being in a family and being in a relationship is that it's much more emotional.
Yeah.
Right? If God takes care of us, and you can see how He takes care of His children, His babies, His whatever. And then they end up growing up and saying, who are you? We don't know you. It's much more than a slave, just not doing what he's supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
Right?
Much more fraught relationship. There's a lot more at stake. So those kinds of abandonments are much more difficult.
Right. And for me, one of the things that Hazinu says is that, you know what? It's not only God being there for us. The truth is also God is there for Himself. Mm-hmm. You go through the book of Dvarim, and the book of Dvarim comes and says, you need to earn the land. And you need to do so and so to get the land. And you need to keep some mitzvot, and you need to be part of the covenant, and then God will grant you the land. So there's a very big fear of God that if we go with that equation, we'll think that it works both ways. Meaning, if we're in the land, obviously it means that we're good, that we deserve it, right? And then we can become cocky. And again, we can forget, even if we don't forget God, by saying He's not part of the equation, but we think that we've actually figured it out, okay? So nowadays, we came back to the land of Israel. Does that mean we deserve it? Does that mean that we've been good? Does that mean that we can go around saying we're righteous, we're the best in the world, we're the most moral, It might be true, But it also might not be, because part of what Azinu is saying is not only God will always be there for you, but you should know sometimes he's there for himself. And you're the tool through which, because as a parent, what happens to our kids is we don't only worry about our kids, but what happens to our kids also reflects on who we are.
Yeah.
And if our kid is misbehaving, we need to help teach them, but it also means a lot about what kind of parent we are.
I mean, you're touching upon here like a massive theological dilemma, right? Meaning in one sentence, right? But this dilemma of, and if now we're going through difficulty, does that mean, right? It's the sachar ve'onesh dilemma, right. Which as I agree with you, it features here in the poem. It features in the tochacha, in the rebuke, meaning the clear correlation between you do good, you get bad, you get bad. This is all over Tanakh. This is something that our listeners know.
But also already in the beginning of Dvarim, it says, don't think that you're righteous. Let me remind you of a few times when you were.
Yes, but the point you're saying also, which comes up by Chet Egel and many other places, which is that you said sometimes it's for God, which is its own theological dilemma. What does that mean? Like, why does God need attention?
I wrote my thesis on it. So.
Okay, great. So we'll check out your thesis. But God says many times over that where he's worried a lot of times what the goyim think.
Exactly.
Right? Exactly. That's the point you're saying.
And that's part of the point of Ha'azinu.
Correct.
For you, the truth is, for you, I wouldn't make the effort. But God says, I've tied my name with your history.
Yeah.
So sometimes I'll do it for me and I won't do it for you.
It's a hard theological pill to swallow, right? You understand? You get that? You get that? That's difficult. But I mean, I'm with you because that's what it simply says all throughout the Torah. But it's a difficult thing. But I think that it's helpful when we think about. So does it mean that we did good or does it mean we did bad? Well, it could be that we didn't really deserve anything, but there's other reasons why we're here or why we're not here.
Right. I think theologically, the statement we don't always know is a good statement.
Yeah, I think it's a good statement.
It's not an exact equation. It's not pure mathematics. There's so many different reasons why God decides to redeem us. And doesn't always mean that we've been good. It could be because God decided to put his money on the land, on the people of Israel.
Yeah.
And for the better and for the worse. So we might be Am Segula and we might be great. And sometimes we'll be Am She'oref and he'll decide to go stick with it because he's decided to make us his Bnei Bechori Yisrael.
Yeah. It's a little bit like, you could choose. You can ignore your kid's tantrum or you can try and do something about it, right? Sometimes Hashem says, Ani ma'ali ma'in, meaning this is, right now, what I'm doing is not a direct consequence of
and sometimes if the tantrum is in the middle of the supermarket, I'll pick up the kid and I'll take him out. Right. Because when it's in the middle of the supermarket, I have other considerations.
Yeah. Adina, as we wind down our conversation, this episode is airing ahead of Shabbat Shuvah. And we've, in like sort of a jovial kind of metaphoric way, kind of touched upon, to me, what are always my deepest thoughts and also doubts about this period of the year, meaning how tshuva functions and what is the correlation between, and this has been a horrifically difficult year for Am Yisrael and for thousands of individuals also in their own personal life and all of the different, ripple effects of all the difficulty. And I think that, for me, it's a question I run away from so that I don't get too deep in the weeds of what was the correlation between the suffering I or others experienced and what was actually being done. Like, meaning it's a relationship that I think is too far beyond my comprehension that I largely move away from it. On the other hand,
painful.
On the other hand, I just think it's also incomprehensible. And on the other hand, it's our season where we're speaking about sin, right? And we're speaking about very quantified ways that we speak about our actions. And so I feel like there's these two movements that go on in me in this period of the year. And always, but more intensely now, of like, I'm going to try and do as much good as possible while not assuming that there's necessarily a direct relevance between all that good I'm doing and what actually will play out. And I don't know if you haven't, if any thoughts about that idea itself, but it comes up in how these texts are meeting the period that we're in now, both of any year and also of this particular year.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what, I want to say something more general, first of all. For me, the metaphor of children versus slaves helps me with, I think, a great deal of shame that I used to feel and guilt. Because when you're in a certain mindset of avadim, of a slave, you're always doing wrong. Because you always have this endless list of things that you need to do for your master. And you only get, you get hit every time you didn't do right, okay? There's this feeling like you're never doing enough. You're never standing up to expectations. And I can see also in certain societies in our Jewish world where their mindset is of slaves.
Yeah.
You wake up in the morning and you have to do this for God and this for God and this for God and this for God. And for me, I sort of felt better in my religious world and better with God when I understood that the metaphor of a children is a much more dominant metaphor. Because I didn't feel like I have to always worship God every single second of the day. Like, I think God wants me to have a good life. I think God, as a parent, doesn't want neurotic kids. He wants kids who live their life at full and who express their special traits and their different talents and express their special, unique personality within a certain framework and keep this relationship alive. Now, Chazal, I think, wanted us to feel like slaves because of this great debt to God. But I think that God wanted us to feel like children. And for me, on one hand, it makes this whole time of Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, a little bit easier. Because I'm not always thinking about what didn't I do? And I'm thinking more about how to make this relationship more meaningful, how to be a better person in whole, how to take this gift that God gave me and bring it to the world. And sort of not how to make God, how to appease God, but how to make God proud. It makes a big difference.
Yeah.
And I think that also has to do with the time that we're in, because if you're slaves, you feel like you can imagine this big whipping at you because you've done this wrong and this wrong and this wrong. But when you're in this metaphor of children, you do believe that God loves you. So it's more of a feeling like, what am I supposed to learn from this? Where is God taking this? And also, it takes me from this feeling of what aren't we doing right in terms of our debt to God, but also what aren't we doing right as a nation, as the sons of God? Like, where are we as a people? Not only you did wrong and you did wrong and you did wrong. Let's tell everybody how they should be better, but how as a society we work together better. How we it's not only that I'm the child of God, but also those people that I disagree with. They're also children of God. And how do we get along together? Because that's one of the things that a parent wants, is for their kids to grow up and to be meaningful people and to be happy and to get along together.
So I just want to say that both you and I apparently have been exploring these ideas in parallel. I actually discovered this a few years ago because you sent a source sheet that was something that I've been teaching for a while. And I'm not going to get into it too deeply now, but I just want to say that what you've described right now is the power of shifting metaphors, which is something that I've been teaching my students for a long time. And it could be different things. For some people, envisioning God as a father, for example, if that brings up very negative things for them, might be better to shift maybe to God as a mother. It exists in Yeshayahu, it exists in Sefer Iyov, meaning not even making things up.
It's also hinted at with Moshe Rabbeinu.
It's also B'diuk hinted at with Moshe. Again, this is a whole nother, we're not going to go into all the other metaphors or God and Am Yisrael as spouses, but I love that idea, and I also just want to share that with our listeners and say sometimes the metaphor we're in doesn't work for us anymore, and we're grateful that there are multiple metaphors that could be offered. Some people need to be a little bit more servant-like sometimes, meaning sometimes they take too much latitude, and they need to sort of remember that I am here ultimately in some dimension to serve. And so that's just
also
a really
Malachi has
place.
the metaphor of ke ben haovedet aviv. You can also be like a continuing son, like the son who stays home to take care of his parents.
Yeah. So there's so many ways to envision this relationship. So I just wanted to thank you. I want you to tell our listeners when they can buy your book. It's coming out very soon.
Well, the problem is that we're recording this a few weeks before. So as of now, when we're recording it, it's supposed to come out this week. Oh. So hopefully by the time the podcast will be out, it will be in the stores. And it can be found on the Koren Magid site.
Phenomenal. We're looking forward. And also another a big thank you to Matan and the Kitvuni program for enabling women's scholarship to flourish in a new way.
I am very grateful. Yes, and if people think this is important, so they can also donate to Matan.
Yeah.
And really
unapologetic appeal. If anyone wants to
yes,
to enable this to continue, it relies on people's belief that there's a lot of Torah that hasn't gotten out there yet for a whole host of reasons, and this is one of the conduits through which women will be able to spend the time, sit down, devote an unadulterated year to getting their Torah out there. And we're looking forward to the shelf that will slowly be filled up by all the Torah of these women. Thanks for coming here, Adina.
Thank you, Sefa.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode from Matan Women's Institute for Torah Study. If you would like to sponsor an episode, please contact the Matan office or email me at podcast@matan.org.il. Please do us and all women's Torah learning a favor and share this episode with all of your friends and family.